Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're putting on our historian hats and stepping into the sheer volatility of early 19th century Southern Africa. We're going to cut right through the myths to analyze the stark military realities and administrative shifts of the era. Together, we'll examine exactly how a discarded prince initiated a period of total war and transformed a tiny South African clan into an unstoppable military machine that would fundamentally reshape an entire continent.
Here is our syllabus for today's lecture. We'll be tracing this remarkable transformation across 6 distinct parts: the dawn of the Mfecane, myths versus oral traditions, iklwa and Roman legionary tactics, amabutho and centralized loyalty, the buffalo horns formation, and finally, the legacy of the world builder. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. The Dawn of the Mfecane. So, to really grasp the sheer scale of the Zulu military revolution, we need to set the stage. The late 1700s and early 1800s in southern Africa were, well, they were brutally volatile. You've got intense population pressure and fierce competition for grazing land, and this pushes the entire region into a desperate era of survival. We call this period the Mfecane, literally translated as the crushing. It's this exact crucible of chaos that allowed titanic personalities to forge entirely new empires out of blood and iron.
Look at this stark contrast between the old world and the new reality. Before Shaka came along, warfare among the Nguni-speaking peoples was, honestly, pretty ritualized. Think light skirmishes, throwing long assegai spears from a safe distance, relatively low casualties. It was almost ceremonial. But the Mfecane? That was a totally different beast. Environmental and demographic pressures completely shattered those old rules, forcing a massive transition into a brutal, high-stakes struggle for pure survival.
Moving on to Part 2. Myths versus oral traditions. Now, as historians, we run into a massive historiographical roadblock here: incredibly unreliable narrators. On one hand, you have 19th century European colonial records that constantly paint Shaka as this mindless demon king. And, it doesn't take a genius to see why. They needed to justify their own later conquests of the region. On the other hand, we have Zulu oral traditions that elevate him to a heroic world builder who unified a fractured people. We are absolutely not here to take a side or endorse the colonial justification or the heroic legend. Our job today is to impartially examine the cold, hard, objective mechanics of his military and administrative reforms.
Part 3. Iklwa and Roman legionary tactics.
Let's zoom in on Shaka's micro-innovations, starting with the soldier's absolute basic toolkit, weaponry. Shaka's first huge revolution was completely tactical. He took that light, long-throwing spear we just talked about and swapped it for something radically different: the iklwa. This is a heavy-bladed, short-handled stabbing spear, and it was a total game-changer. By bringing in the iklwa, Shaka engineered a complete psychological revolution. He quite literally stripped away the safety of distance from the battlefield. And here is why this matters so much. It wasn't just a new tool, it was a completely new philosophy of war. He forced his warriors to close the distance, get up close, and engage in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Actually, it's incredibly similar to what the Romans did. Just as Roman legionaries fundamentally broke ancient battlefields by stepping in close with the short gladius sword to chop up less disciplined phalanxes, Shaka's forced shift to close-quarters combat turned the Zulu forces into a highly disciplined, virtually unstoppable machine.
Which brings us to Part 4, amabutho and centralized loyalty.
Because as any military historian knows, a fancy new weapon is completely useless if you don't have the organizational structure to wield it. Shaka didn't just change how his men fought, he fundamentally changed who they fought for. He systematically reorganized his entire army into the amabutho. These were age-grade regiments that totally wiped out the traditional, old-school clan-based military units. This wasn't just a minor military tweak, guys. It was a massive structural reform with profound socio-political implications for the entire region.
The amabutho system deliberately severed those messy, fractured tribal and clan ties. Instead, it redirected absolute, unquestioning loyalty straight to the king. This is how Shaka built a highly centralized imperial administration out of completely disparate groups. It's a massive shift in loyalty that mirrors the unifying reforms of Genghis Khan, or even, if you think about it, the bastard feudalism we see during the Wars of the Roses.
Part 5. The buffalo horns formation.
So what happens when you combine these deadly new stabbing weapons with absolute centralized loyalty? You get an incredible tactical application on the actual battlefield. I'm talking about his most famous innovation, the impondo zankomo, better known as the Buffalo Horns Formation. It is an absolute masterpiece of battlefield geometry specifically designed to achieve total, inescapable encirclement of the enemy.
Let's break down the anatomy of this maneuver step by step. It really shows how the Zulu army operated as a single, terrifying organism. First, you have the chest. These are your heavy hitters, the veteran warriors who strike head-on to fiercely pin the enemy right in place. While the enemy is stuck dealing with the chest, step 2 kicks in, the horns. These are your younger, much faster troops, and they sweep rapidly around the flanks to completely box the opposing force in. Finally, step 3, the loins. This was the reserve force. And the craziest part? They would literally sit with their backs to the battle so they wouldn't get too eager or hyped up. They remained perfectly calm until they were called in to deliver the final crushing blow. Pin, flank, and utterly crush.
Now, theory is all well and good, but you're probably asking, how did this centralized military machine actually perform against overwhelming odds? Well, we can test the real-world efficacy of this system at the pivotal Battle of Jokyo Hill. Here, Shaka's relatively small force was up against the massively larger nineteenth army, but by brilliantly using the terrain to his advantage and perfectly executing the Buffalo Horns formation, Shaka proved that structural discipline and superior tactics could easily overcome sheer numbers. It's an incredible historical echo. It really reminds you of the Spartans locking down the narrow pass at Thermopylae, or even modern defensive stands like we saw at Kiev.
Finally, Part 6, Legacy of the World Builder.
Let's step back from the tactical battlefield and look at the macro-level impact, because the domino effect of this military revolution was staggering. Hundreds of thousands. Just take a second to let that number really sink in. That is the number of people displaced across the subcontinent. The cost of Shaka's relentless victories was the escalation of the Mfecane into a period of total, devastating war. It triggered a cascading wave of violence and mass migration that echoed for decades. Yet, from a purely administrative standpoint, you can't deny the results. Shaka's centralization forged an empire straight out of pure chaos. He took a discarded prince's tiny clan and turned it into a regional juggernaut, laying the foundation for the mighty Zulu kingdom that would later go toe-to-toe with the British Empire itself. He's one of those historical figures who is deeply reminiscent of leaders like Ashoka or Aurelian, men who literally built or restored entire worlds through the sheer, unforgiving force of the sword. As we wrap up our explainer today, I want to leave you with this final thought to chew on. How do we, as students of history, weigh the bloody cost of world building? It's the ultimate duality of Shaka Zulu's legacy, a brilliant, unifying administration that is forever inextricably linked to terrible, widespread carnage. Thanks for joining me for today's lecture, and as always, keep questioning the past.